Good morning and welcome to episode 8 of BuiltPlace's Housing Conversations. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Peter Williams, and we're going to be having a chat about Help to Buy Equity Loan, which is the scheme for new build properties. And so, Peter, we'll probably start at the beginning. Should we have a little background to why it was introduced?
Yes, I mean, it came in 2013 as a very part of a package of government measures, really, mortgage guarantees, help to buy equity loan, as a way of re-stimulating the housing market post the GFC and the long, slow recovery. Um, Obviously, it's a scheme that was intended primarily, I think, to stimulate house building supply. The collapse of house building supply was threatening all government targets, and obviously itself was a contributor to the economy. Um, and so the first purpose of it really was to reopen the house building market. The second purpose of it was to give more support to first time buyers. And I think a byproduct of both of those was also to give confidence to the market more generally. And I think in broad terms, it has succeeded. We'll obviously go on to discuss some of the strengths and weaknesses of the scheme, but the program has been around probably far too long, but in essence, it has worked.
Yeah, yes, and it was a scheme that seemed to actually deliver on the two sometimes competing priorities of government, which was supply and home ownership.
Yeah.
And we've seen a bit of a shift in priorities over the last 10 years.
Yes. Yes.
And the clearly it came along, and we've talked about mortgage guarantee, the Help to Buy mortgage guarantee in previous episodes, which had less of a direct impact and was more indirect, but gave a big boost to the mortgage lending market. And I suppose one of the priorities here was the unwillingness of lenders to lend at higher loan to value ratios on new build. And I think we've seen that still. My understanding is the nationwide announcement of returning to the higher LTV market is limited to properties that are more than 2 years old. So there's still a lot of hesitation amongst lenders around, I suppose, the pricing.
Yes, I mean, on that, it's an important point you raise. I mean, clearly, historically, mortgage lenders have always been somewhat suspicious of the new build market. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is clarity about what the price of the property is. It's one of those rare elements in the housing market where price isn't dictated by the existing market, but rather by somebody choosing a price out of, in a sense, nowhere. And obviously that price may also be boosted by the accompanying white goods and other facilities that are included with the property. So lenders have always been somewhat suspicious about the price of new build property. That process has settled down over time, once the Council of Mortgage Lenders, as it was, put in place a sort of process for getting clarity about incentives and other mechanisms that might be used to justify the price. And I think with Help to Buy, basically a lot of lenders started to think again about new build as a market opportunity. And a number of significant lenders in the market generally are now skilled up to properly understand the new build market and to provide significant mortgage resources to that market. So I think that's been a byproduct of Help to Buy, and a very successful one.
Yes, I've heard it said that a house builder would have rather sent you on a foreign holiday than give you a discount on the price of their home. I'm not sure how true that still stands.
Yes.
And, I suppose the pricing question is an interesting one, because there's been. I personally find it very, very difficult to robustly show new build premiums or not. Depending on your data you use, you can find one of massive amounts, you can prove there's not one. And so my experience is it's very difficult to prove that Help to Buy has increased the price of new build properties. And I know you've done quite a lot of research for MHCLG around the impact of Help to Buy.
Yes, it's a really difficult area, and of course it this issue about the difference in price between a new build property and the existing market triggers a load of unfair commentary on Help to Buy, because inevitably people can point to Help to Buy having a higher price for an equivalent, so-called equivalent property in the market, and therefore people arguing that all it's done is inflate prices. The problem, as always, as you're highlighting, is you're not comparing like with like. A new build property, typically, even if it's the same 3-bed semi-detached, is no doubt built in a different way with different features than an existing 3-bed semi-detached. And that comparison like for like is really problematic and has led to a load of spurious price comparisons between the two. The only interesting piece of work I've seen on this is a piece of work done by Christian Hilber and colleagues at the LSE, where they looked at price differentials between Greater London, which has a higher Help to Buy threshold of 40%, and the immediate markets outside of the Greater London area, and then the difference between the English, either side of the English and Welsh border, to see whether there was a price effect. And in London, what they show is that because the supply response in London is so weak for all sorts of reasons, there is a clearer evidence of a price premium effect of Help to Buy. Whereas on the English-Welsh border, supply is easier, and there was no obvious price effect. So it's the only little bit of work in rather unusual circumstances that's tried to show a price premium effect.
Yes, and I suspect we'll come back to those geographical boundary issues when we talk about the future of Help to Buy. Which is quite important. And so its focus was on first-time buyers and supply, and it's open to everyone, but actually it has been quite successful in helping first-time buyers. And I just put a chart up for everyone else to see the annual completions under Help to Buy equity loan for first-time buyers, and I believe it's about 80% are first-time buyers. So
it's been very successful in terms of, I mean, it has, one of the benefits of having it open to all is that it's been able to be treated by the market as a market scheme rather than an affordable home ownership scheme. And that, in a sense, has allowed it to settle into the market as a whole rather than it be seen as government policy separate from the market. That inclusion of the wider market is, I think, helpful, but by and large, 80% of the buyers have been first-time buyers, and that's true in Scotland and Wales as well. So it has actually reached the target. There have obviously been some second-time buyers who've used it to move on as well, but they'll be restricted, obviously, going forward.
One of the big features that your research and others has shown is that people have been buying bigger than they otherwise would have done, which has potentially, it's got both pluses and minuses in my view. It's the people being able to ride out any ups and downs in the property market over a longer period is always the thing. I very rarely give personal financial advice on the housing market, but try and buy a home where you can happily sit there for quite a number of years, if not decades. But inevitably, by doing that, you have a downward. You're limiting the number of future transactions in the market.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, my shorthand for the Help to Buy scheme is bigger, better, sooner. In other words, you can buy a bigger house in a better location and sooner than you would otherwise have done. And clearly, for some people, it has meant they've skipped a rung in the housing ladder. They've bought a bigger property. That means, at least looking backwards, they probably saved some stamp duty in the sense they did one transaction rather than two. But as you say, it obviously takes transactions out of the market, as it were, over the longer term. So I think it is a scheme where a large number, I think 60% roughly of buyers could have bought anyway. The question always in our research has been, but they couldn't probably have bought the property that they bought. In other words, it enabled them to do better than they would otherwise have done. 40% couldn't have bought without the scheme at all.
Yeah, and so that 40%, I'm not that great a fan of the word, but the additionality, so the extra homes that Help to Buy has delivered, is around about 40% of them. Those buyers wouldn't have bought anyway, and probably a certain proportion of the other 60% probably wouldn't have bought new build. Without the scheme.
I think that's a really important point. I mean, my view is that the Help to Buy scheme has basically upped the attention given to new build property as a whole. It was always seen as a rather lesser market than existing. It wasn't traditional. It didn't have high ceilings, all the other things that people associate with older property. And new Help to Buy, I think, put new build property higher up the spectrum in people's assessment of what they might buy. So it's increased the demand for new build. I think that's a positive in essence, which again we have to take account of.
Yes, and it certainly has contributed to the increase in supply. I've got a chart up for people here looking at the underlying private implied private completions, because as my conversation with Kate Barker the other week showed, there's a lot of problems with house building stats. So identifying the exact contribution, it can be tricky, but it certainly has increased the overall supply.
Yes, I mean, you mentioned additionality. There's clearly demand additionality. Help to Buy clearly stimulated demand significantly. There's also supply additionality. That's really even more problematic to assess. We worked on the basis of a one-to-one, that on the model that house builders operate, which is they sell one, they build one. Just to keep the market ticking over, we worked on the assumption that supply additionality was always going to be at least 1 for 1. So of there's 263,000 properties built by December 19 under Help to Buy. That would be the demand additionality, supply additionality it had produced as a minimum.
So for my understanding and others, so in the does that suggest that in the absence of Help to Buy, you would have had that many fewer?
Yes,
homes?
Yes, and it may well have been more. I mean, it's a very simple assessment that just working off the way builders work, which is, if I build one, I can afford to. If I sell one, I can afford to build another one, which is crudely how they operate. Yeah. Then obviously Help to Buy, the number that they built and sold would be additional to what they would have done otherwise. But there are lots of flaws in that argument.
Aren't there always?
As you say, I think the additionality point, I think trying to ultimately get a very, very scientific assessment of the impact of Help to Buy is extremely difficult, given all the different elements that are involved. I mean, the National Audit Office has had a go, the select committees had a go, various academics have had a go, various consultancies have had a go. MHCLG commissioned us to do 2 reviews. And I mean, people are still arguing about the impact of Help to Buy.
And I mean, the thing it has done, and it does appear to have driven an increase in supply, and it was successful in the period that it needed. And I've argued previously that we should have removed it by now.
Yes.
Partly because it has been successful, and it would be useful to have ready as a policy ready to go, perhaps in a situation like we find ourselves in now, where the market needs a bit of a boost, or perhaps more likely in early part.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think most of us would say this policy has gone on far too long. It's partly unfortunate that economic circumstances external to the scheme itself have sort of contributed to the view that, well, if we take it away now, it's going to make things worse. Scotland had planned to close the scheme in 2021. I noticed they've just extended it for another year. Wales is still unresolved as to what it plans to do, and England, obviously, in 2021 will streamline the scheme and limit its access, but plans to remove it in 2023. 10 years is a very long time for a short-term stimulus measure.
Yes, and I suppose it's worth commenting on the kind of its next step as we understand it right now, which is that it will be limited to first-time buyers, which shouldn't make all that much of an impact, given that 80% are first-time buyers.
Yeah.
But the perhaps the bigger impact is the regional price caps, which
Yes.
already we know there's been a lot of analysis from house builders, agents, and others looking at where that will have an impact, and so you will find very strange anomalies where you've got a regional price cap applying to, all regions have very high value markets and very high low value markets, and inevitably there'll be a shift towards the lower end of markets, and you could find slightly strange things happening around, say, the edge of London on either side of the
yes, I think that's
boundary.
absolutely right. And I mean, clearly the longevity of the Help to Buy scheme is an enormous accolade in terms of the efficacy of the lobbying by the Home Builders Federation and their members to sustain the scheme. Whether they can be any more successful in terms of moderating the price caps is another matter. There will be anomalies. And just as with COVID, we've realized the granularity of the landscape, the geography of the housing market, or the geography of the virus market is very, very complex, and requires, in a sense, a response at the local authority level rather than the regional level. But I don't think that's where the government will end up.
No, and I suppose the one thing to add there as well is it's likely to shift buyer activity away from the very biggest homes, just where the price caps come in as well.
Yes,
which
I think that's right. I think that view is it will shift the balance, and that in one sense you could argue that's appropriate retargeting of it in a more focused approach. Was the scheme ever really intended to stimulate the supply of detached homes? Probably it wasn't, but it did. And therefore some refocusing is probably, not a bad thing, albeit there will be the anomalies you highlight.
Yes, and I suppose that kind of takes us on to where does it go next? And we were having a bit of a short debate on email last night, and for me, I suppose a lot of it depends on what the government's priority is. Right now we've seen the stamp duty holiday has come in, and my feeling is that perhaps they may have even gone a bit early with it. The housing market activity is looking very robust at the moment from the limited data we have access to. I think we're going to see the rebound over the summer, and with then the stamp duty holiday on top, we're going to see quite a robust market. So clearly total activity is important, but within that they've clearly set aside the prioritising first-time buyers in that, and by allowing investors and others to come in and albeit pay a higher stamp duty, they're paying much less, and so the gap in terms of what they would pay relative to first-time buyers is very much narrowed. And so I wonder whether that shows a shift that we can then read across to the supply, to new supply. Are they going to be interested in first-time buyers and home ownership via Help to Buy, or are they even interested in trying to hit this 300,000 homes per year target across England?
Yes, I mean the target is an important point, and I think in Wales one of the reasons why there hasn't been a decision on Help to Buy is that they realise how significant Help to Buy is in meeting their targets for supply, and similarly in England, losing Help to Buy or changing it or weakening it is obviously a factor to take into account in terms of meeting the sort of 300,000 ambition. So this decision about what to do and whether to keep it, whether to terminate it, has been rumbling on for some while. The latest ministerial statement has been that it is ending in 2023, and it will be replaced by First Homes. I think for me, part of the problem is that First Homes itself, which the government has now announced a pilot for, is itself an unresolved scheme. There seem to be significant market barriers to that really working. Both builders and lenders seem unsatisfied with the structure they've arrived at. So it's not clear at the moment that the government has got a successor scheme. and therefore, in some senses, we've got for sake of argument, 2 years to resolve this, to have something to replace it with. But the government's mind at the moment, I was surprised at. I thought they would step back and roll it on, but they appear to be set on the course of getting rid of it by 2023.
I suppose the next few months and quarters will give us a clearer idea if we have the combined effects of Brexit and the economic fallout in Q4 or Q1 next year. Then they may find themselves forced to reassess that.
They might. I mean, all things are possible. And as I understand it, we haven't heard the last on housing measures in the autumn statement and budget. There may be further announcements about housing measures then. So the Chancellor may have another go at this. Whether we'll get any further clarity, it's hard to tell, but that possibility must remain.
Yes, I suppose one of the big problems is partly its success, and the house builders haven't particularly helped themselves from a PR point of view over the last few years with bonuses, quality, leasehold issues, and many others. And so to be seen to be pumping money into shareholders of listed house builders is not a particularly great look.
No, that's absolutely right, Neil. And I mean, when you look at the scale of which HelptoBuy has fed the performance of a number of house builders, I mean, it's somewhere between a third and a half of sales for most of the major house builders. And you look at their profits, which are always going to recover because there was a recovery. The question is whether this has led to super profits, and the returns to investors have been significant. That clearly has been a source of some concern, and as you say, alongside that has been weak performance, not least the scandals around leasehold, which are extremely unfortunate, and then obviously continuing problems about the quality of some new build as well. The sector hasn't really stepped up in quite the way everybody might have imagined, and government didn't appear to have any sort of contract with house builders, which implied, well, we'll provide this if you do X, and that the market seems to have been left to move forward without the government perhaps exerting the pressure it might on that market to do better.
Yes, and one of something in my mind is in the absence of HelptoBuy, and clearly First Homes at the moment doesn't look like anywhere near substantial enough to replace them. Do we maybe see an element of what Boris Johnson did when he was mayor of London during when he was looking to drive housing market delivery then, when actually you saw a big increase in delivery, but a lot of it was funded through overseas investment, and clearly that works for somewhere like London and city centres, but it doesn't particularly work well for the HelptoBuy market of detached and semi-detached homes.
No, and that cavalry I don't think will come to the rescue this time. One senses in a post-COVID economy, some of those issues about some of those markets are going to be less attractive anyway, and therefore I don't think there'll be a big upsurge there. And of course, equally, we've had the contraction in higher loan-to-value mortgage lending as well. So actually, first-time buyers in particular are coming under pressure in terms of access to high LTV. And of course, HelptoBuy at least helps overcome some of those hurdles. I think in all of this, of course, we can't also ignore the fact that government now has a very significant equity interest in the housing market. I mean, the HelptoBuy loan performance has been very good. There have been very few arrears and possessions. Government, and the data on this is really poor. There's a little bit in the Homes England annual accounts, but it implies a return of somewhere between 10 and 13% on the loans that have been paid off. That's the kind of typical return the government has made on its investment. Going forward, obviously, we have the possibility that the housing market might contract. in which case the significant loan book that's outstanding and sits on the Homes England account is obviously exposed to losses. That again may be a factor in government thinking.
Yes, and it will be interesting to see how that pans out. And I think we're probably coming to the end of our conversation, Peter. I don't know if you've got any final comments you wish to make.
No, I think watch this space. I mean, as we, I think, have rightly aired, Neil, that there are a number of factors still at work which might suggest this scheme has legs still to go, certainly in a contracting economy and market. But at the same time, we equally have argued, on the other hand, why it ought to go. So I'm afraid it's a finely balanced issue in which politics will play an important part.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for watching.